They gave me the file on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the succession vote. I remember the weight of it, a standard compact evaluation folder, blue binding, the Queen's photograph clipped to the inside cover. She looked composed in the photograph, not vacant, composed, as if she had decided something, and the deciding had cost her everything she had left to spend. Her name was Inaya Vos Thaleen, last Queen of the Thaleen Reach. The file said she had been silent for 6 months. Not selective silence. The examining physicians had ruled that out in the first week. No trauma to the speech apparatus, no cortical lesion. The resonance suppression grenade deployed the night her court fell had struck the layer of her mind where language lived, and left nothing scorched, nothing severed, just static, a white noise where her voice used to be. 4 physicians had signed the non-viability certificate before me. All 4 had sat across from her for the mandated 40-minute examination, asked their questions, waited the required interval, and then written the same conclusion in marginally different language. Non-responsive, non-communicative, not capable of governing. Recommend transfer of succession authority to the next eligible heir. The faction backing her sister had been patient, 6 months of patience, unusual for a succession dispute. It told me the certificate mattered to them. They needed it signed by an independent compact physician before the chamber would accept the transfer. Without it, the vote was procedurally vulnerable, which meant that whoever had brought a resonance device into her court and deployed it at close range on the night of the collapse had planned at least this far ahead. I walked into the anteroom on that first Tuesday with my examination case and a thermos of black tea. She was already seated at the table. The orderly admitted me without comment. I imagine he had given up commenting on the habits of visiting physicians somewhere around the third one. What the file hadn't prepared me for was how precisely directed her stillness was. She wasn't staring at nothing. She was watching the narrow viewport, the strip of reinforced glass that looked out over the docking arm. A cargo tender was running its approach lane. Nothing remarkable, but her eyes tracked it the entire way across the glass. I set down my case. I poured a cup and sat across from her. "My name is Rael Koss," I said. "I'll be here every day for 3 weeks. You don't have to say anything. I'll talk, and you can listen. And if anything feels worth responding to, you can respond." The tender completed its approach and eased out of the viewport. Her eyes moved with it until it was gone, then settled back to the center of the glass. I talked for the rest of the session. The docking arm's maintenance schedule, the design of the evaluation table, bolted to the floor and impossible to angle toward the window. A poor choice for a room meant to put people at ease. I mentioned 19 years as a compact physician and 11 of those on succession evaluations, mostly because they were slower than emergency medicine and I was, at this point in my life, genuinely tired of emergencies. At the 40-minute mark I stood. Her eyes moved from the viewport to me, just once, then back. I wrote in my notes, "Subject demonstrates consistent visual tracking of external movement and directed ocular shift upon examiner movement. This is not consistent with non-engagement." I did not sign the certificate. By the end of the first week I had stopped consulting the intake form and kept a separate set of personal notes, which I locked in my examination case. What I was mapping wasn't data the certificate would have recognized, it was intervals. The gap between my sentences and her stillness wasn't uniform. There were questions that produced no discernible change, and there were questions, specific ones, found by trial and the slow accumulation of mornings, that produced something so subtle, most physicians wouldn't have marked it at all. A slight tension in her jaw, a breath drawn a half count longer than the one before. I started asking those questions more often, not pressing, just opening the space and leaving it open, the way you might prop a door and then step back from it, because it wasn't my door. On day 9, I told her that the resonance device used against her court was a weapon designed to be deniable, small enough to pass as a calibration tool, precise enough to do what it had done. That 4 physicians had been asked to look for brain damage and had found none. That if the suppression was a weapon effect rather than neurological injury, there was a reasonable clinical basis for arguing it was temporary, and that temporary things ended. I told her I had requested the original weapon specifications from the Compact Armaments Registry, and had been told the file was restricted, which told me something about who had access to it, and who had requested the restriction. I said I thought she deserved to hear all of that said directly to her face, rather than filed in a summary report she might never be permitted to read. She looked at me for the full last 10 minutes of that session, not at the viewport, at me. Her pale gold eyes were steady and clear and exhausted, the eyes of someone who had been keeping watch from a very long way inside herself. The faction's representative found me in the corridor at the start of the second week, a lean, careful man, very polite. I had 8 days to submit the certificate. After that, The chamber would proceed with whatever documentation was available, meaning Physician 4's finding would stand. I told him I was thorough. On day 15, I brought 2 cups, set one across from her without comment. She didn't touch it. That was fine. I wasn't trying to feed her. I was trying to show her I thought of her as someone who might want tea someday, and that when she did, I'd have already set it where she could reach it. On day 17, I told her that her sister had signed a pre-ratification document 3 weeks prior, indicating willingness to accept the succession seat. I didn't tell her what to feel about it. I said only that she should know. Then I said, "You're still here. I want you to know I can tell the difference." The session ended. At the door I paused and said, as I had every morning for 17 days, "I'll see you tomorrow." Her jaw shifted. One small motion, half a degree. I wrote it down in the corridor and did not sleep well. The deadline was the next morning. No certificate appeared in the chamber's intake queue. What appeared instead, at the 5th hour, was a formal request for an extension under Compact Medical Statute 7, Section 3. An examining physician may delay succession proceedings if the subject's condition is demonstrably evolving, and early certification may produce an inaccurate record. The request attached 17 days of session notes and an interval analysis that had taken me the entire night to assemble. I went back to the anteroom at the usual time. The cargo tender was running its lane. She was watching it when I came in. I poured 2 cups and sat down and didn't say anything for a while, which I hadn't done before, but it felt right. Then I said, "I filed for an extension. The vote is postponed 14 days. I thought you should know." The tender passed. The viewport went empty. She looked at me. And into the silence I had left open, the one I had been leaving open every morning for 18 days, the space between my last sentence and the door, she spoke one word. She said my name. Not a title. My name. Rael. One syllable, worn and careful, like something she had held at the back of her teeth a long time, and had finally decided she trusted the room enough to release. I set down my cup. The look that moved across her face was not relief, and not gratitude, and not the collapse I had spent 19 years watching people make when the worst was over. It was quieter than all of that. The look of someone who had been in static for 6 months, and had finally heard a signal come back. I said, "There you are." The succession chamber met 4 days later. My interval analysis entered the formal record. The extension was ratified. Her sister's pre-ratification document was suspended pending full reassessment. Inaya Vos Thaleen spoke 11 words to the panel that day, halting, careful, dredged from somewhere the device had pushed her voice but had not destroyed it. Lower than I had imagined it across all those mornings, the voice of someone who had been very far away and came back on her own terms. I stayed on at Verith Station through the reassessment period. No one asked me to stay. I kept showing up to the anteroom at the usual time with 2 cups poured, and she kept being there, and her words kept returning, 1 or 2 at a time, like signals finding their way through interference. The static was never absence. I just had to be quiet enough to hear what was underneath it.